in minds of everything that went on throughout the week, everything that we have coming up before us next week, and to try to listen attentively, Lord. We want to understand you better. We want to have a closer walk with you and a better relationship with you. Just bless us and help us, keep us safe throughout the week as we will go to and fro on our separate ways. Gather us together here at the appointed time, Lord Jesus. These are our blessings we ask in your name. Amen. Hope everybody is doing well. It's good to see all of you. My mother sends her greetings from her hospital room. She is in the hospital, had surgery this week and last week, and had some complications. She's better. She's doing okay. She'll be in the hospital for about a month in rehab and recovery to get her back up and moving along. And she wanted me to tell you all hello, and that she will be back out as soon as she's physically able to get up and going. Thank God that he did bless in the situation and the circumstances that she was going through. Don't want to tell too much of her business, but it was complicated and touch and go when we were worried, but God blessed and everything's okay. And she's back to being her wonderful self that she's always is, and everything that comes along with that. We thank God for it. Just to let you guys know, so I don't forget to mention it at the end, we will not be meeting next week. It's Mother's Day. Just that way nobody gets caught off guard, fellas that have mothers, but Mother's Day is next Sunday, because I almost got caught off guard until my wife mentioned Mother's Day's on the 8th. But it's never this early. It's always, the third Sunday in May, and now it's on the 8th, and that's ridiculous. But we meet at 3:00, which is when everybody's out with their families, everybody's out spending time with their mothers and everything, and we want to be mindful of that. Family is important. Family is one of the biggest blessings God gives us. Family is one of the biggest blessings God gives us, and we want to take the time to reverence that and honor that. And so, we won't be meeting next week. We got a lot of ground to cover. I don't think I'm going to get through this entire thing today. Which means we'll pick it up again when we meet on the 17th. No, if that's the 8th, the 14th. I can't do math, the 15th. Thank you, the 15th. We'll pick it up again when we meet on the 15th, but we have been dealing with trying to understand what does grace mean in the Bible when they talk about grace, because it wasn't a religious word when they would talk about it. And so we talked about a few different ideas that were going to set up a stage for us to be able to just have this discussion. The word grace is tossed around in churches as a catch-all for the blessings of God, but there are few, if any, believers in this culture who understand the cultural context and meaning of the word. In the days of the Bible, it wasn't a religious concept, but it was a social construct. Modern American culture really doesn't have an analog, so it's difficult for us to understand what it means. In other words, it's tough to find something to compare this to in our culture, because we don't really have the institutions that this was based on. It was a multifaceted term in the Bible that described the relationship between patron and client. And what we spent our time with last week was talking about patrons, or last time we met rather, talking about patrons, talking about clients, talking about mediators. Does anybody remember any of the stuff we dealt with when it came to what is a patron, what makes a client, what is a petitioner, what does any of that stuff mean?
Patron.
No, go ahead. You spoke up first.
Patron is sort of a host.
Okay, I can work with that. Host, what were you going to say? A supplier, somebody, a host, somebody who has something that you need that you can't normally get hold of, right? And what's a petitioner?
The person that is in need.
Right. So a petitioner makes a request of a patron, and if the patron decides to grant that request, then that petitioner becomes a client. Okay. And what is a mediator?
It'd be considered the go-between, the person that the patron goes to. If he doesn't have it, he goes to the mediator.
Other way around.
Mediator brokers the deal between the patron and the petition.
Right. So if you know a guy that knows a guy, then the go-between is the mediator.
So he's the middleman.
He's the middleman because he's the one that has the relationship with the person who has what you need. Sometimes, for example, I need a glass block windows done. I could go directly to the man and get my glass block windows taken care of. Go ahead and get that taken care of and get that squared away. But if a buddy of mine if somebody that I work with needs glass block windows done, and I go to Glenn and Glenn, this guy needs glass block windows done, I'm setting up, they're working through me. I'm working as a mediator to get that job done. That's within workplace context, but a patronage client contract was much more than just a transaction. We go to the store and we pay our retailer for the clothes we buy, and that's the end of the deal. It's done there. We say, thank you, have a nice day. Thank you for your business, but that's pretty much the end of the situation. In America, if a favor is done, a simple thank you or compensation for services rendered concludes the transaction. However, in biblical culture, it was offensive to the patron as well as an insult to the patron-client relationship to seek to politely conclude the relationship with an expression of gratitude. So you're entering it with the difference between selling something and having a patron is that when you have a patron, you are entering into a relationship with that person. It's going to be a long-term, we'll say, arrangement, and I'll explain more about what that looks like and what that means in a little bit. But the worst thing that you could do is say thank you, or maybe not the worst thing, but to say thank you means that we're pretty much done. And a patron is not interested in just a business transaction with you. They're entering into a relationship with you where they give you what you need and you become obligated to provide honor, loyalty, and to try to repay as you can. But the accounting is different than what we normally expect, and the relationship and dynamic is different than what we expect. We talked about a reciprocal relationship. Does anybody know what reciprocity or reciprocal is from math or from anything like that? It's been a while. Most of us don't have to deal with that. Well,
Better way might be say, you supply something, I supply something. Along those lines, is that what you're looking for?
yeah, something where something is
Right.
owed beyond just the, if I give you access advice, we're in a relationship where at some point in time, I have the right to expect something from you.
And you use the example, which is a good one, in The Godfather, where he does a favor for a funeral director. And the funeral director, of course, is starting to be nervous because he says, I'm going to come to you and say, oh. But then in the end, it turns out to be something that the funeral director can provide him that only he can provide him. And so there's that idea that when Don Corleone came to him and said, my son, you need to make him look good for his mother. He took care of it, didn't charge him anything. Whatever it took for him to do, he would do it because Don Corleone did something for him, and he didn't ask him, well, it's going to cost you so much because I have to have this guy going. He just said, I'll take care of it. And one of these days, I'm going to come and see you or something. And that's sort of the way it is. And it there is what my passion is bringing out, is that it's a social context. But with God our Father, it's based upon the construct of the social context, but it goes a lot more deeper.
Right.
If we come to him for deliverance, then he expects us in turn to praise him, to tell others about what a great God this is. This guy, when I was down, my patron, my father took care of me.
Exactly.
And then other people go, oh, really? Yeah. Oh, okay. And in turn, they go to him. And that's where Jesus came, and he's our mediator. Because we couldn't do it face to face. We had to have God, the Son, come in and do it. Because he was the one who provided access for us.
So that's pretty much the way that the patron-client relationship works, and the dynamics of which is the way that's the context in which they understood the term grace. Like we said, grace was not something that was just bestowed upon by God. Grace was something that other people could provide towards you. So we're going to talk about it from a social aspect and then get into the theological aspects probably next week and get through as much of this as we can today. But we've looked closely at some length at the relationship and activities that mark the patron-client relationship, friendship, and public benefaction, because these are the social contexts in which the word grace is at home in the 1st century AD. The word grace is charis, which is, I've got in your notes, charis. If you look at the way it's spelled, it's very similar to the way the C-H-A-R-I, it's similar to charity. Charis is a similar analogous word or spelling, but that is the word that translates to be grace or favor. When you hear about God's favor and you hear about God's grace, some people try to get real theological and say that God's got favor and then he's got grace. Their language, same thing. If they said favor, they were talking about grace unless they used a different word. Today, grace is primarily a religious word heard only in churches and in Christian circles. It's progressed through millennia of theological reflection and developments and accretions, witnesses of the multiplication of terms like justifying grace, sanctifying grace, prevenient grace. We've got all these subcategories of theology. For the actual writers and readers of the New Testament, however, grace was not primarily religious as opposed to a secular word. Rather, it was used to speak to the reciprocity or the give and take among human beings and between mortals and gods, or gods in pagan literature. The single word encapsulates the entire ethos of the relationships that we have been describing. So the give and take between people, or the give and take between a person and a deity, is what is referenced in term grace. First, grace was used to refer to the willingness of a patron to grant some benefit to another person. In this sense, it means favor, in the sense of favorable disposition. In Aristotle's words, grace may be defined as helpfulness towards someone in need, not in return for anything, nor for the advantage of the helper himself, but for that of the person helped. In this sense, the word highlights the generosity and disposition of the patron, benefactor, or giver. So that's one way grace is used, the willingness of a person to do something to help somebody else. The same word carries a second sense, often being used to denote the gift itself, that is, the result of the giver's beneficent feelings. So on the one hand, grace is the feelings, a person's willingness to help. Sometimes grace is referred to as the actual help he provides, or the object that the person provides, or the advice they provide. That is also another term referenced by the word grace. Finally, grace can be used to speak of the response to a benefactor and his or her gifts, namely gratitude. Grace thus has a very specific meaning for the authors and readers of the New Testament, meanings derived primarily from the use of the word in the context of giving benefits and requiting favors. The fact that one and the same word can be used to speak of the beneficent act and the response to the act suggests implicitly what many moralists from Greek and Roman cultures stated explicitly. Grace must be met with grace. Favor must always give birth to favor. Gift must always be met with gratitude. So in other words, to say it a different way, we got one word that refers both to a person's willingness to help and the receiver of the help's response. The same word referred to both ends of it, not just what's given, but also the response of the person. Most of our dealings with grace is just the grace of God. God gave me a blessing. But there's a second half to the concept of grace that should be implicit and interlinked with that, and that is the response of the individual, meaning that this is not just a transaction where I get one thing, but it is an into a relationship. From many ancient witnesses, we learn that there is no such thing as an isolated act of grace. In other words, just somebody doing something for you is not what's considered grace. There's no such thing as an isolated act. An act of favor and its manifestation initiate a circle, a dance in which recipients of favors and gifts must return the favor. That is, give again to the giver, both in terms of a generous disposition and in terms of some gift where the material is received. Only a gift requited well and nobly, only a gift requited is a gift well and nobly received. To fail to return the favor is in effect to break off the dance and destroy the beauteous act of grace. So When people talk about grace, they should be, in the context of the Bible, talking about entering into a relationship where I do for you, and because I did for you, you do for me. Now, the tit for tat analogy that Walt used, or phrasing that Walt used, is the closest thing that we have in America to being able to describe that. But in a lot of people's minds, that seems like it's exploitative. I'm just doing for you so you can do back for me. I'm doing something for you because so that way I can see what I can get out of you later. You got something I'm gonna need, so I'm gonna make sure I do something nice for you. That's some of the Americanized exploitation that happens within relationships. I'm only friends with you because you got something I'm gonna need, so I'm gonna be nice to you until I can get what I need out of you, and then we're gonna go our separate ways. There's all kind of messy stuff that can happen within the context of those kind of relationships over here. But that's because we don't have the cultural context of grace and honor to govern. There were rules and expectations that governed grace, and what was expected on the part of the giver, what was expected on the part of the receiver, and how did they interact with each other, and how did they view what was going on. And that's what we're going to get into. Questions or comments so far? Okay, showing favor or showing grace. There were clear codes of conduct for the giver, guidelines that sought to preserve, in theory at least, the nobility and purity of the generous act. And that's important to understand, is that what we're talking is theoretical. In practice, sometimes it didn't always go so nicely, because people are people and people will mess up anything, no matter how wonderful it sounds. But this is the way it was supposed to work in theory. First, ancient ethicists spoke much of the motives that should guide the benefactor or patron. Aristotle's definition of grace in its first sense, the generous disposition of the giver, also underscores the fact that a giver must not act from self-interest, but solely in the interest of the recipient. So tit for tat, I'm looking for what I can get from you. That's not being graceful. That's not benefits. The rules that apply to grace say that the benefactor, the person giving, has to be looking out for and interested in your best interest. Not what they can get out of it long term, not what's going to come back around to them, but in the interest of the recipient. If the motive of this is primarily self-interest, any sense of favor is nullified, and with it the deep feelings of obligation of gratitude. The giver is never to give with an eye to what can be gained from the gift. The giver does not give to an elderly person to be remembered in part of their will, or to an elected official with a view of getting some leverage in politics. Such people are investors, not benefactors, not friends. So giving for political influence, giving because I think this is going to somehow come back around and benefit me, makes me an investor, not a benefactor, not an agent of grace. That disqualifies a whole lot of people's giving that you receive stuff from nowadays. Seems like there are constantly strings attached. And some people might say, well, you're talking about a tit-for-tat relationship. Got you in 1 second. You're talking about a tit-for-tat relationship where people are expecting stuff. We'll clarify a little bit of that in a minute. But the person who's giving's expectation is not that this is going to come back around and benefit them somehow. Their expectation is that what I'm giving will be of benefit to the person I'm giving it to.
So this is like an example of God loves a cheerful giver.
Yes. I could go for a long time on that right there, because, and I'm only gonna bother with one side of the argument because we don't have time for me to give both sides of the argument. You got a lot of people that will get bent out of shape over what people do with the money that they give, because they believe they're giving it to the church. On the one hand, you want to give to somebody that is going to be prudent and wise with what you do. But at the same time, you have to understand that you are giving to God, and you are giving to the benefit of the institution. If you don't believe in the institution, don't give them the money. But if you're going to give them money, then what you've given has been given to God, and he's looking for you to be cheerful and looking only for the benefit of what that work's supposed to be. Yes.
So if somebody has their tithes and they give it to a person instead of giving it to the church, is that the same concept, or?
That's a different concept.
That's a different concept, okay.
And give me 1 second, I'll come back to making a differentiation between that just in short terms. Well,
I just want to comment on giving, that we should never knowingly give to an institution that we know is dishonest or not using the funds the way they were meant to be used. But on the other hand, we shouldn't put conditions upon our gift. And a real good way to honor God is when you give something to a ministry or an individual, you trust God to take care of it. Say they misuse it. Say they go ahead and take off and abscond with the funds. Well, there's a good example of this where my daughter's church, the old church I went through some rough times. The pastor took a few grand, and he didn't take everything, but he took a few grand. He had a credit card, he charged a bunch of stuff, and it got to be a deal. And he resigned, and they didn't go after him in court. They said, you know what? We're not touching it. That's what you did. We're leaving it alone. And I thought that was really good because they could have got him in court. They had records and everything showing what he did, and they didn't. They chose not to do that. Instead, they let God handle it.
Right.
And that's something that's tough for us to do because we say, man, come on, you ripped us off.
Right.
Pay up. But that's where you honor God by trusting God. That even if we don't see the justice in our lifetime, we know that He's going to take care of it.
Now, Elisa, with respect to your question about tithes versus giving it to somebody, I'm going to deal with this strictly from a historical biblical sense, not from what goes on in church today, because that'll be an entirely different conversation and much more complicated. I have to deal with a lot more stuff. But within the context of the Bible, when he said that people were to pay a tithe back to the temple and back to God, that was God's way of getting people to finance and participate the work of the ministry and the relationship, because the priests didn't get paid, the preachers didn't get paid, the temple needed financed and the maintenance of the temple and all of those things. So since the entire nation benefited, he says everybody is going to give a tenth or a tithe or pay a tribute. And it was an active relationship. And you couldn't get around that, taking that tithe and giving it to a person. That would be taking what was supposed to be appropriated for God and giving it to somebody else. If you wanted to do something for somebody, that's great, but nothing replaces, there was nothing that you could do to circumvent or get around or that would replace investing in the work of God. Now, to complete the circle, the church, there were mechanisms set up within society and within the temple that were supposed to help the poor. So God put things in a specific order and wanted things to operate a specific way. So no, you couldn't just give somebody something and say, well, that's my tithes. That was designated, appropriated, and sacred, consecrated for God, for the work of the ministry. That was a benefit to the nation, to keep the nation in right standing. So, yep. Now, although gifts are not to be made with a view to have some desired objective or give in return, gifts were to be made strategically. So in other words, even though I'm not supposed to be worried about what I'm going to get back out of this, that doesn't mean I'm going to just give anything to anybody. Good gifts, badly placed, are badly given. Good gifts, badly placed, are badly given. So when it comes to, if I know that what I'm giving to somebody as a gift is going to be something that they're going to end up wasting, even though it's a good gift and even though it may be something that they appreciate, if all it does is leave them in the exact same situation, leave them in the same rut, or they're not going to show any appreciation, it's badly given, because the person that I'm giving to is not likely to experience the relational dynamic that we're supposed to be investing in here. I'm investing, I don't want to use the word investment in this case because we talked about investors, but I'm showing grace to a person to the end that they're supposed to be helped. And if at the end of it, they're not helped, they're in the exact same circumstances, then it was just a waste. And it was not a wise use of, it was not a wise gift, not because they're not giving anything back, but because the grace is not benefiting them. An important component in deciding who will be a worthy recipient of such gifts is the person's track record of how he or she has responded to other givers in the past. So, I'm a gracious person. I'm willing to help anybody. Let's say I'm a rich person or whatever, and I'm willing to help anybody and I'm a gracious person. But if I look at this person and know that they have a track record of squandering the gifts that have been given to them by other people, it would be kind of dumb of me to go ahead and give them the gift. They did use some discretion in determining who they were going to bestow graces upon. Is this person likely somebody that's likely to honor the relationship that we're entering into? Has the person responded nobly with gratitude? He or she will probably be worthy of more favors. A reputation for knowing how to be grateful was, in effect, almost the equivalent of a credit rating. If I knew how to express gratitude and honor the relationship, then it was more like, if that was my reputation, that I receive gracefully and I reciprocate with grace. Because remember, we talked about grace is the give and the take. That's the entire context of it. It's a dance, it's a circle. And if I am willing to continue the circle and keep things moving, then I'm likely to receive. If I'm the kind of person who's going to break the circle, then what's the point? Because it's not just about doing something, it's about entering into a relationship. The noble giver evaluates his or her potential beneficiaries, not in the light of any actual return that they make, not in terms of the value of the gifts or services that they may exchange in the future, but in light of the disposition of the recipient's heart towards feeling gratitude. You ever hear about people being ungrateful? That would disqualify you from being a recipient of grace if you had a reputation of being ungrateful, acting ungrateful. I don't even have to say it. That's good. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Appreciating and remembering the gift and making whatever return the person is able to given his or her means. So the whole "what have you done for me lately" mentality that people tend to take towards relationships would disqualify, that's a very good way, would disqualify a person from being a future recipient of grace, because that "what have you done for me lately" attitude betrays the mindset and mentality that is supposed to accompany grace. And like I said, we're not talking about necessarily God's grace, we're just talking about human interaction and what the context, social context of grace was. So questions or comments? That's what's expected on the end of the giver. Okay? From the person who receives grace. Receiving a favor or kindness meant incurring very directly a debt or obligation to respond gratefully, a debt on which a person could not default. The person who intends to be grateful, the person who receives should intend to be grateful even while she or he is receiving, and should turn his or her thoughts to returning the favor. Gratitude towards one's patrons was a prominent example in discussions of what it meant to live out the cardinal virtue of justice, a virtue defined as giving to each person his or her due. It is ranked in importance next to showing the gods, those supreme benefactors, the proper honor and services. Failure to show gratitude was classified as the worst of crimes, being compared to sacrilege against the gods. The ingrate committed a crime against gods, humanity, and ultimately him or herself, while the person who returned grace for grace embodied the highest virtues of piety and justice, and was valued for contributing to the forward movement of the dance of grace in which so much depended. So that means that it was expected on the end of the giver, there's certain mentalities and attitudes that are supposed to govern him. A person who receives grace, even as they're giving it, should be trying to figure out, how can I respond with gratitude? How can I show my gratitude? It was expected. It was a debt. It was not enforceable by law. Nobody was going to come and throw you in prison. But if you broke that responsibility of showing gratitude and trying to repay the grace that you received by meeting grace with grace, it was as if you had committed an act of sin against the gods or disrespected them. It was a huge deal socially. So it wasn't something that people theoretically would take lightly, to have received something. Well, once I get it and a month or two has passed and I don't need them anymore, then I'm gonna act like I don't know them. To do that was as serious as if you had violated the gods. Responding justly to one's benefactors was a behavior enforced not by written laws, but rather by unwritten customs and universal practices, with the result that a person known for gratitude would be considered praiseworthy and honorable by all, while the ingrate would be regarded as disgraceful. And we've talked about how important honor and shame is, and that's how you made your living. That's how people decided whether or not they were going to even sell to you on a normal basis. For example, like, today we have equal opportunity and you're not allowed to refuse people's services and all these wonderful things. In that day, if a merchant did not like you by reputation, they didn't have to sell to you. They didn't have to give you a good price. They didn't have to do business with you. They dealt business with you on the basis of your honor, on the basis of the status and stature that you held. And so even on a day-to-day basis, a person that was disgraceful and a person that had that kind of lack of honor or that kind of shame, they didn't have to sell anything to you. I'm not doing business with this person. So there was no legal mechanism for enforcement, but within society, you did not want to get a reputation as being an ungrateful receiver of grace, because it would ruin you. There was no law for punishment, no prosecution, but when a person failed to requite favor, but the punishment of shame and being hated by all good people. Let me back up because this is actually pretty good. There was no law for the prosecution of the person who failed to requite a favor, but the punishment of shame and being hated by all good people would more than make up for the official lack of sanctions, which means that no self-respecting individual would have anything to do with you if you mess this up. You're not going to be able to get gas. Nobody's giving you food. Nobody will even give you a cell phone contract. Nobody with any sense of self-respect is going to have anything to do with you. So it was a very serious obligation that was supposed to be repaid. Let me not move on because we'll get there in a second. Neglecting to return a kindness and forgetting of kindness already received in the past, and most horrendous of all, repaying a favor with insult or injury. These were courses of action to be avoided by an honorable person at all costs. As we consider gratitude, then we're presented with something of a paradox. Just as favor was freely bestowed, so the response must be free and uncoerced. In other words, we say that somebody who provides a favor has to do it freely, can't worry about what they're getting back in return. There can't be anything that you can't, in theory, respond to favor for fear of what will happen to you if you don't. That defeats the purpose. I gotta pay them back because if I do, nobody will do business with me. That defeats the purpose. You just messed the whole thing up. So it's a paradox. Yes, I'm obligated to do it, but my obligation and fear of social reprisal isn't supposed to be what drives me. My gratitude is supposed to be what drives my actions, not fear of reprisal if I don't do it. There is no gratitude is never a formal obligation. There is no advanced calculation of or agreed on return of the gift given. There's no advanced calculation of or agreed on return for the gift given. So I give somebody a car, okay? Don't set a price. I just give away a car. The person's response of gratitude, they're not sitting and figuring out how long do I have to act grateful before I've actually paid this off? How long do I have to honor this person before I pay this off? How many things do I have to do nicely to them before we even things out? That is not the way that grace works. We don't sit and calculate and try to figure out, okay, how many nice things do I have to say about you before we're even? Nevertheless, the recipient of a favor knows that he or she stands under the necessity of returning the favor when it's been received. The element of exchange must settle into the background, being dominated instead by a sense of mutual favor, mutual goodwill, and generosity. In other words, this person just did grace for me. Now we're in a relationship, and I will respect and honor them because we're in a relationship. And thereby the what have you done for me lately thing goes out the window because I'm not keeping an account. How am I doing on time? All right, we're not going to get through all of this, but we'll get through as much of it as we can today. I'm not keeping an account and I'm not keeping a record of how much I've paid back, nor is the person that gave something to me keeping track of how much they've already given me. Not in a graceful relationship. That's not the way it's supposed to work. Manifestations of gratitude. In personal patronage, in which the parties are not along equal footing, public honor and testimony comprised an important component of a grateful response. An early witness to this is Aristotle, who writes that both parties should receive a larger share from the friendship, but not a larger share of the same thing. The superior should receive a larger share of honor, and the needy one should receive a larger share of profit. For honor is the due reward of virtue and beneficence. In other words, if we're talking about somebody that's got a lot of money doing something for somebody that doesn't have that has a little bit of money, that's the best way to put it in economic terms. Giving advice, giving a stock tip, giving money, whatever. Both people should get the larger share from the friendship. I should get more honor from the person that I give to, and the person that receives gets more money. I get honor, they get money, and we both benefit from the relationship, because honor, honestly, is more. You ever heard that friendship's more valuable than favors? Or friendship is more valuable than payment, I'm sorry. So you do something for somebody, and they ask you, how much do I owe you? And you say, there's no charge. I'd rather have your friendship, because your friendship is more valuable than whatever money you might pay me. This is I actually had a buddy, and I did some editing for a book that he wrote, and he wanted to, well, it's internet buddy, never met the guy, but he sent me his book. We interacted online. He sent me his book. I read through it, started doing some editing, and he wanted to pay me for it. I told him, don't worry about it. Just, with your friendship and your interaction, because he's a real good guy. I'm like, at some point in time, maybe I'll have something that I need your help with, need you to write something for me or something, but don't worry about it. He ended up crediting me as one of his editors in his book, but that's it. We both benefited without money being exchanged. I gave him service, and he gave me credit. And now I'm official, and I'm an official book editor. I don't know if I'll ever be again, but for that one, I can look at the title page and look in the cover page and see my name's there. And if I ever wanted to put on a resume that I've edited a book, I could. I wouldn't do that because I don't actually do that on a regular basis, but I could say that I did it. Friendship, relationship, more important than the exchange of money. So going back to what Aristotle says, both parties should receive a larger share from the friendship, but not the same thing. The superior person or the superior status should receive the larger share of the honor. The needy person gets a larger share of the profit. For honor is the due reward of virtue and beneficence. Such a return, though of a very different kind, preserves the friendship. Increasing the fame of the giver is part of a proper return for a benefit. We talked about this last time we met. And a gift that one is ashamed to acknowledge openly in the hearing of all has no business being accepted in the first place. So part of the expression of gratitude, we're talking about being grateful. Being grateful is not just the getting up and singing songs and shouting all over the church. Being grateful is going about living in a way that brings honor. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but living in a way that brings honor to the person that paid you the benefit, or that gave you the benefit. You're a patron. So going out and telling people, go out to the hedges and the highways and go out in the byways and tell them about who I am and what I've done. If you don't want to tell them about it, don't take it. If you don't want it to be known that somebody did it for you, don't accept it. Now there's some stuff we do privately because we're sensitive to the shame and the honor of the other person. But realistically, if you don't want it known that it was done, don't let somebody do it for you. That's the approach that they took, and that's the feeling that they had. Because you owe them now to honor them. You owe them now to build up their reputation in the community. You owe it to them to tell people this person is good. This person is willing to help. This person is a good person. This man has high value, to elevate them. That's what it means to glorify somebody, to magnify somebody. Oh, magnify the Lord with me. We quote the psalm, don't know what in the world we're talking about. We're supposed to be making him seem bigger in the world to the people that don't know. Let me see. Yeah, we'll finish this up and then call it a day for today. A second component of gratitude comes to the expression in relationships of personal patronage or friendship is loyalty to the giver. So we talked about gratitude being talking the person up and bolstering their honor. Another part of it is loyalty to the giver. showing gratitude, and owning one's association with the giver, even when fortunes turn and it becomes costly. We'll break that down in a second. I think it'll come clear as we read. While in theory, clients were expected to remain loyal to their patrons, in practice, if a patron fell into political trouble or if his or her fortunes turned and began to wane, the patron's entourage of clients would seem to evaporate. Such a practice, however, was contrary to the ideal of gratitude. The person who disowned or disassociated himself or herself from the patron because of self-interest was considered an ingrate. So the way that this was supposed to work is Glenn becomes a patron, and no matter what turn Glenn's life takes, whether he elevates or whether he tanks in life, whether he's popular or unpopular, because he is my patron and I'm his client, I'm going to remain loyal to him. I'm going to continue to try to honor him. I'm going to continue to work to the benefit of him. But what happened, and it kind of happened to Jesus, we'll take a look at Jesus. Jesus has crowds on one day, Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed be the rock. The next day, and people acting like they don't know him because he becomes unpopular. Some folks say crucify him because he becomes unpopular. Loyalty means that it doesn't matter if your stock raises or drops, I'm going to still be in your corner. I'm still going to be proclaiming the goodness of who you are and what I've known you to be. Then people may talk about you. People may decide that they're going to push you aside because you're still cool with somebody. But loyalty says, I'm not worried about that. I am obligated by honor to remain loyal in that relationship. The principle of loyalty meant that clients or friends would have to be careful not to become entangled in webs of crossed loyalties. Although a person could have multiple patrons, to have as a patron two people who were enemies or rivals of one another would place a person in a dangerous position, since ultimately the client would have to prove loyal and grateful to one, but disloyal and ungrateful to the other. So if me and Walt didn't like each other and didn't get along with each other, you wouldn't be able to come to both of us to ask for help. You. Because at some point in time, you're going to have to be loyal to one of us. And if we have opposing interests, you are the client of both of us, at some point in time, you're going to be disloyal to one of us. You can't be in the middle and remain neutral. That is, Lord, I don't have time to talk about this. That is a concept that doesn't work realistically in relationships. One person is abusing you, mistreating you, and you're supposed to be my friend, but I must stay friends with both of y'all because I ain't in it. That's not the way it works. That's not the way relationships are supposed to work. That is being disloyal to the person you claim to be friends with. If I'm to the victim, pick a side. Either you're friends with the abuser or you're friends with the victim. You can't be friends with both. Trying to do so is being disloyal to the relationship. Well, I'm gonna be cool with you, but I don't care. When I'm with you, I'm gonna be cool with you. When I'm with them, I'm gonna be cool with them. And as long as y'all just leave me out of it. That's not the way society worked over there. I think we need to get back to that. Just my opinion. Nothing in the Bible. No man can serve two masters. We'll get back there in a second. No one can serve two masters honorably in the context of these masters being at odds with each other. But if the masters are friends or bound to each other by some other means, the client should be safe in receiving favors from them both. Put into a spiritual context, when they say either you serve God or you serve the devil, you can't have both of them be your client or your patron. If you're a patron of God, you have to be loyal to God. If you're a patron of the devil, you end up being loyal to the devil. And the most obvious place that this ends up popping up is when dealing with politics. And I'm not going to talk about political parties or any specific candidate. But if I am afraid to stand up for godly principles because it is politically incorrect and because society doesn't like it, then I have split loyalties. If I feel like I have to be quiet and not proclaim and not stand by what I know is the truth because politicians or social advocates or whoever says that, let me leave it alone, says whatever it is that they're saying, then I'm there's the world and their system, and there's God and the kingdom, and I have to pick one to be loyal to, and not try to reconcile the two, because there is no reconciliation between the two sides and between the masters. So, and as another example of this, there was one point, the lesson of loyalty becomes this: be careful who you accept and receive help from, because that help can put you in relationship with that person where you feel like you're compromised or have to split between the two.
There's a real interesting example. Jay Leno, when he was first starting out, he was working in some nightclubs and stuff, and a known member of the mafia was watching him. And this is what a story I heard. I didn't hear from him, but and that he said something to Jay Leno about, hey, I can help you out or anything. And Jay Leno very respectfully declined his offer. And basically he said, because you know what? Once you make an obligation like that, and he was from an Italian background, you don't bail out of it. You're bound to that. And he knew that if he was going to accept that man's favor, that he was going to be bound to him some way in the future, not just once, but that he was going to be bound to show this guy favor.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff. And Frank Sinatra, another figure, tried to do just the opposite, tried to pretend like he was a gangster and associated with known mafiosi. And he didn't say he was, but it's the idea. He had pictures taken with him, and he was using their prestige in that community and sort of make him seem like a tough guy and everything. And then when it came to the point where all of a sudden he suffered from it, because President Kennedy was also a friend, and said, they said, you got President Kennedy, you realize he associates with mobsters. He's not one, but you can't be staying at Frank Sinatra's house. Because this is where one of them, a mafia don, stayed. He says, you can't be doing that, President Kennedy. President Kennedy said, okay. And then, then Frank Sinatra learned a hard lesson about loyalty.
Yep. So to wrap up for today, and I knew we weren't going to get through all of this. Finally, the grateful person, this is in dealing with gratitude, the grateful person will look for an occasion to bestow timely gifts or services. People of a similar authority and wealth, friends, can exchange gifts of similar value. Clients, on the other hand, can offer services when called on to do so, or when they see the opportunity arise. The point of the gift was not to obligate a return, but to create a bond that binds two people together. So we've got three things that are involved in gratitude. One, honor, telling people, talking the person up. Loyalty, and then if the opportunity comes to be of service, you do what you can to help. You look for opportunities, do what you can to help. It's not, I need help, I've done stuff for all these people, now I can't find nobody. But the people that you are in a relationship of grace with, that you're in a dance of grace with, you should be able to call some of those folks and get help when you need it, because somebody should be looking for an opportunity to help you out. Take into a spiritual point of view when God needs certain stuff done, when within a church, within a collective, we say that we want to do something and that God is directing us to do something. It shouldn't be have to pull teeth to find somebody who's available to do it, because we're in a relationship of grace. But because grace has been talked about as a one-way proposition, we don't see the relationship between the two. So all of this social stuff that we're talking about, and the way society worked, all of that stuff was understood when somebody talked about grace. And how many of you all have ever heard any of these types of things discussed in the context of God's grace? When we talk about unmerited favor and everything, the social aspect of it, and ever heard any of this stuff? But this is what they understood. When you read in the Bible, they talk about God's grace. This is what they're talking about. This is how everybody understood things. And like by the time we get done with this, we're going to deal with the question, what was amazing about God's grace? Or what is amazing about God's grace? Let me give you guys a hint or show you why this question needs to be answered. For us in the church, we say it's God's unmerited favor, God giving me things that I don't deserve. That was not in and of itself amazing. Everybody theoretically could do that. If I have something you need even if you don't deserve it. It was commonplace social practice to be a patron and to give to somebody, even if they didn't necessarily have a means of paying it back, even if they couldn't purchase it, even if they weren't of similar status. That kind of grace was ingrained in society. So what is it about the grace of God that was so impressive to them? Not only could you have grace with people, but within the polytheistic system, you would look to get grace from the gods by going and making sacrifices and blah, blah, blah. There was this big dynamic, and whereas all we do is talk about grace within the church sense and within relation to God, to them, when they were talking about it, grace was available from people who you developed a relationship with. So it was a thing to be admired and a thing to be grateful for, but it wasn't as unusual as it seems to us. So what set God's grace in the Bible apart from everybody else? And why is it amazing today? That's what we're going to get to by the time we're done with this. Looking at this, we got 2, maybe 3 more lessons. I got to finish this one up, and then I got another one that might end up turning into 2 by the time I'm done with it. And then we'll be done with that. So any questions or comments before we wrap this up for today? Okay. I'm going to cut the broadcast and talk just for a couple of minutes about the move that we are looking to undertake, just to give you guys an idea of what's going on with that. I want to save a little bit of time to do that. So those of you who are watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Email me, hit me up with any questions you may have at any point in time. Be happy to try to answer them.